Happy New Year. The form I filled out last week for my mission to Tanzania, a journey coming up in February, asked if I were traveling on business or pleasure. Of course, my first thought was both. A first trip to Africa should surely hold some pleasures, but basically it was business. Traveling from northern Thailand, traveling about 60 hours, and ending this trip on a tiny plane in central Tanganyika isn't exactly pleasure, and it's certainly not a vacation either. The goal was to get somewhere, do something, and accomplish something. I took quite another journey back in May of 2016. Well, actually a pilgrimage with our diocese. For nearly 2 weeks, we explored the Holy Land, Israel, the West Bank, places and spaces where Jesus lived his ministry on this earth, where he was born, where he was worshiped by the Magi, where he grew up, and where he died. It was an amazing trip, full of many wonders every day. Sacred moments of prayer, astounding sights of beauty, and sounds, sometimes just silence, so sacred it made you feel like God was reaching out and touching your soul. There was the morning prayers coming from the soaring minaret above the nearby mosque, where we mostly stayed in East Jerusalem. And there was the wind blowing in the desert mountains. I've never felt so close to holiness. Coming from here, New York City, it was a different way to be in a land where religion was so integrated into everyday life that it sometimes felt like just breathing was a kind of worship. It's a state of mind, a state of being that's just a little difficult to maintain when your daily walk takes you through Times Square and your journey is a subway ride or two. It was a trip and a mindset that invited insights. And today's gospel took me right back to those places. And so I think I have at least a little glimmer, just an inkling of what the journey of the Magi might have been. The Epiphany story is a story of a Middle East journey, the first Christian journey of sorts. A story we tell ourselves at this time of year of wise men coming to worship the child Jesus. The trip they took was probably not for pleasure. Maybe they would have checked off the box business had they been required by Herod's government to complete the form to enter Judea. But the trip is one still overshadowed with unknowing, and for me, it stands out in Matthew's gospel for the degree of its imprecision. Matthew, a writer who favors order, who likes structure, who seems to keep track and making lists, this story tells me one with a remarkable lack of detail. We only have guesses for even the places of the origins of the three travelers. Some speculate Persia or Arabia or Yemen. There's a lot we don't know. The number of magi is unknown. The three wise men are not specified as such. There could have been more than three. They assuredly were not kings. So little is known that legend, custom, and scholarship has speculated widely on who these people were. Were they astrologers from Babylon or perhaps from China? Or to mention only some of the possibilities that have seriously been proposed, they could have been magicians or sorcerers or expert jugglers. Or they might have been wizards, people not known for their goodness, maybe enchanters, blasphemers, or enticers of idolatry. Some believe they must have been part of a band of traveling merchants While other academics claim they were scientists or members of a priestly caste, their names were a 6th century act of fictionalization. Were they wise? Were they even all men? A few weeks ago, I watched a perennial favorite at Christmas, the film Love Actually. And in the children's pageant scene, I'm pretty sure the Magi were lobsters. So take your pick, one or the other, a combination of these possibilities. It's a strange conundrum for the gospel writer, nicknamed the accountant and sometimes called the historian. Perhaps the form to enter Judea should have had a third checkoff box. Not business, not pleasure, but allegory. Because as symbolism, we have one of the most enduring and prophetic stories in the Christian tradition. What we do know of the visit of the Magi is this. The Magi were not Jewish. We know that they were filled with joy when the star overhead stopped to identify the location of the child. We know they brought precious gifts of 3 specific kinds, and they paid homage. And what we can understand is that they represent a model of worship for the Gentile world. Collectively, we may have embellished and romanticized the actual text of Matthew over the centuries, but no matter how inaccurate our Christmas nativity displays might be, we should not lose sight of the story, the allegory, the meaning of journey. For a quarter of a century, I worked as a parapatologist, sometimes called a mobility specialist, a person who trained blind, deafblind, and visually impaired individuals to travel independently. It was not only my job, it was my ministry. I worked all over the greater New York area, and I instructed hundreds, maybe thousands of people to get around their neighborhood, their homes and workplaces, and navigate the subways and buses. When I attended the graduate school program that trained me to do this, it involved many courses in the vision system, psychology, and communication. But surely the most impactful classes were those I took under blindfold. Classes when I would wear a sleep shade over my eyes and for hours on end with a cane like this, I would travel the grisly streets of downtown Little Rock, Arkansas. The experiences without my vision were meant to give me those moments of insight, those aha, if you will. Like my students would later experience, I was taking a new type of journey filled with personal risk and great hope. Hope for a life of renewal, a life of freedom, and a life enabled to be connected to community in ways previously unimaginable. I can't tell you how many times during a lesson one of my students would have their own epiphany. It was a pattern I observed again and again. A journey begun in fear and uncertainty. One that started with, I don't need a cane. I don't want a cane. I don't want the stigma. But when my student was open to a new view of the world, open to learning, open to taking the journey, almost always there would come the time when my student would be enabled. Maybe they just made it safely from their apartment to their mailbox. Or maybe they traveled a route to a new job. Or maybe they even traveled to Japan, as several of my students did. But the epiphany would come, and there was often the feeling of being filled with joy. With the best of results, the student would discover that not only had they taken a physical trek, a personal journey filled with risk and unknowing, but an allegorical voyage as well. A discovery of overwhelming importance that made so many other possibilities real. Now, I don't mean to diminish the manifestation of Christ to the entire world. It was an event prophesied and a grand shift for humanity that began 2,000 years of mission and ministry to bring the kingdom of God, or more correctly from the Gospel of Matthew, the kingdom of heaven, to all humankind. But as a simple deacon, you'll excuse me if I see the personal lesson as well. Matthew gave us the gift of a story so imprecise that we may, maybe even we should, fill in the blanks and make it our own story. It's a story that says we are all with Christ if we are enabled. Jesus came for everyone, and he is available to us if we are open to discovering the possibilities. Right now, you might be feeling the exhilaration of Christmas is gone, finished. You probably haven't said Merry Christmas in about 2 weeks. Our calendars have been tossed and replaced. The dried out fir trees sit all over the sidewalks of New York City. But the narrative arc of these seasons, Advent and Christmas and Epiphany, is not yet over. Epiphany enables us. It enables us with another chance for possibilities to find blessings we experienced during the Christmas season. And if you traveled a bit off the path, a second chance to experience the grace and peace. Not everyone, not all Christians take a journey like the Magi. The religious elite who surrounded Herod did not, despite knowing the place and time of the birth. But we are enabled. We can take the journey. Not necessarily for the journey itself, but for the epiphanies along the way. Find the light. Continue to follow. Stop to pay homage. Offer yourself as a gift. And when we experience the Epiphany, literally or metaphorically, that will be our good news in today's gospel. Amen.